This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
This is Dr. Fred, and welcome to another episode of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. You know, they had told me that I would meet some really interesting people if I did a podcast, and that's really how it's gone. As you've been listening, I've been able to meet some of the more fascinating people that I've ever met before, and I get to interview them and show my listeners, or allow them to show my listeners who they are and what they're about. Today is not only no different than that. Today I have just a stellar guest. I just have someone who somehow has fallen into my world and we've not really met before. And, you know, I've been able to do some research. Many of you have probably even heard of her, and she's grew up in an important lineage, and she's become, and been involved with business titans that in her lifetime intimately, her husband and her father. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that. But in her own right has become a titan by her own self for the future of humanity and the things that she still stands for. But not only still stands for, folks, this is someone who's making a difference today for the future in front of us. So it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you, my listeners, today's guest, Mitzi Perdue. Mitzi Perdue, thank you for being here, Mitzi. It's just a wondrous, wondrous glory to have you on my podcast.
Well, what an absolute complete joy to be with you and with our audience, because you do something that sort of is what I feel my whole life is about, and that is wishing humanity well and trying to do everything that we can for our fellow man.
Exactly. I mean, what else is there to do, Mitzi? I mean, in the end, you know, after everything washes out, after all the dust settles, after, you know, you've gotten taken care of whatever little small things your little small self wanted, what else is left to do in this lifetime? Hello, listeners. Dr. Fred here. So as you know, I meet lots of incredible people who are up to really big things in the world, and Mitzi Perdue is just another example of that. But each and every one of us are all dealing with something, right? No matter whether we are tackling some of the largest problems in the world or seemingly tiny ones, we all face challenges both internally and externally. As a psychiatrist for many years, I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can count from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can possibly imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a simple and effective methodology designed to assist people to gain a new sense of freedom and empowerment, the ability to look square down the barrel at whatever they are dealing with and march forward becomes reliably more available when using this particular methodology. And now, for the first time, I'm pulling back the curtain on this methodology, and I'm publicly revealing this process and the associated mindset that contributes directly to its maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out perfectly in my new book called Creative 8: Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up at Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. But as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of the Creative 8 today. I look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to our conversation with Mitzi Perdue.
Welcome to humanity. Well, that reminds me of, in my life, I've experienced the runner's high. And I bet most people know what the runner's high is, but when you really are kind of exceeding your normal effort and you're tired and you're exhausted and you're pushing a little bit farther, and then suddenly there's this wonderful breakthrough where nothing takes any effort. And I had this experience. I'm running farther than I usually do. And I'm not a great athlete, trust me, but I was going harder than I usually do. And suddenly, as I'm running by some flowers in a field, they begin to glow like the Holy Grail. And oh dear, you're a psychiatrist, so I'm scared to say this, but in my imagination, I heard a voice. And the voice, this is part of the runner's high, the voice said, would you like to know the purpose of life? And I said, yes. And
yeah, good answer.
And here's what the voice said. The purpose of life and the meaning of life is to serve one another.
Mm-hmm.
And that works for me. I think that is the meaning of life.
Well, it's a beautiful story. Thanks for starting off with that. And, a lot of places that I have read or in people that I've heard speak or people that I've watched, and, even different religions and philosophies, often that's what it boils down to, is really being here to serve others, really being here to serve humanity, really being here as, one who is available for the planet around us. I think that's what you're pointing to.
Well, it makes me think of something that I overheard my father say one day. And that is, my father was the co-founder of the Sheraton hotel chain, again in the 1930s. And when he started, there were no employees, no hotels. At the end of his life, he owned the family owned 400 hotels, and he employed 20,000 people. And we've just been talking about the meaning of life. Well, here's what I overheard my father say one day, and it just seared in my memory. He said, the greatest joy his money ever gave him was in giving it away. Now, isn't that a cool attitude for a titan of industry or a captain of industry to have?
Yes, it's gorgeous. And, I think I bypassed a bit of your bio. So now we know that you're the daughter of the co-founder of the Sheraton hotel chain. But let me touch a little bit on your bio, if you don't mind, to let my listeners know who I really am speaking with if they don't already know you. So Mitzi's a science writer and a health writer. And she's the past president of the American Agri-Women, 35,000 members. She's also a syndicated columnist for Scripps Howard. And her column, The Environment and You, in the 1990s was the most widely syndicated environmental column in the entire country. Mitzi's television series, Country Magazine, was syndicated to 76 stations. She's the founder of CERES Farms at CERES Farms, the second-generation family-owned vineyards that sell their wine grapes to wineries such as Mondavi, Kendall-Jackson, Folie à Deux, Toasted Head, and others. Mitzi combines the experience of 3 longtime family businesses. As she already mentioned, her father, Ernest Henderson, co-founded the Sheraton hotel chain, and her late husband, Frank Perdue, was the second generation in the poultry company that today operates in more than 50 countries. Mitzi herself founded the CERES Farms in 1974. And Mitzi has another passion, and I think we'll get some time with that today, having to do with human trafficking. And she has founded an organization called Win This Fight, Stop Human Trafficking. Mitzi, again, thanks for being my guest today, and thanks for sharing who you are to my listening base and your listening base. So I ask an open question to you, Mitzi. You have a lot of places you can go here in the next 45 minutes or hour, however long we're going to speak. And you could take this in multiple directions. And we talked briefly before the conversation about different directions that you might go. But as you sit here right now, as you sit here listening to this question, I'm going to ask a simple and widely open-ended question, which is, Mitzi, who are you? What do you really do? I know, right?
Well, no, I have a reason for laughing that I'll share with everybody. When I was in television, I had, it was a talk show, an interview show. And I used to joke that I'd take you, this was back in the 1980s and 1990s, where you have a handheld mic. And when you're speaking, you're putting the microphone at your mouth. And then when your guest is speaking, you put the microphone towards their mouth. Well, jokingly, I'd put the microphone towards their mouth and say, describe the universe and to give 2 examples.
Yeah.
And I feel as if it's coming back at me, but I'll be a good sport. I will answer. Where am I and what am I about? Well, I have a motto in life that I really try very hard to act on, and that doesn't mean I succeed, but here's the goal. I would like to use the resources, talents, whatever I can to increase happiness and decrease misery. And where does that lead me? Well, it's led me to expecting to dedicate my remaining years to trying to do something about one of the worst atrocities that I can think of, which is human trafficking. And I'm going to guess that a lot of people listening right now are in the same situation that I was on April 11th of a year ago. April 11th of a year ago, I'd heard the phrase human trafficking.
Right.
I didn't really have much understanding of it. It was just sort of like another phrase, like, I don't know, black holes or Andromeda or who knows what. It didn't have deep meaning for me. But I heard a lecture, and in this lecture, there's a man who rescues, his particular specialty is rescuing young girls from traffickers. And he explained how a young girl, maybe she's been kidnapped, maybe she's 12 years old, she'll have to have sex with strangers up to 12 times a night, 365 days a year, whether she's got her period or not, whether she's feeling sick or not. She has to do this, and she'll probably do it until either A, she's rescued, or B, she dies. Yeah, the amount of suffering involved in such a thing, I don't think it's easy for anybody to get even a feel for, but
no, unspeakable. Yes.
Yeah, unspeakable. And then I began studying it a little bit, and I've learned that according to the United Nations, there are 40 million people who are in human slavery. Slavery isn't something that ended during our Civil War. No, it goes on today throughout the world. And so I wanted to do something about the worst atrocity that I'm aware of.
And I get that. And thanks for bringing that home a little bit. I think I have a notion, you say human trafficking, and I sort of see something, and then somehow it does fade into black because I can't think past a certain point. I really feel like I'm limited because once it reaches, heinous atrocity beyond speakability, I don't have anything more to add. I only just cringe, or I only just, duck, or I can't tolerate it.
By the way, I so get that. It's so horrible you don't want to think about it. On the other hand, there's another side to that coin, which is when you can do even a little good, you can do an extraordinary amount of good for the people you're helping. So horrible as the subject is, if you have it in your power to join with others and do something about this, well, it reminds me of a quote from Mother Teresa. And Mother Teresa said, "It's immoral to be discouraged by the size of let me get this exactly right. It's immoral to be discouraged by the magnitude of a problem. The good that we can do, we must do." And I think that makes a lot of sense. If we can do something about this scourge, we should. And the good news is that the United Nations recognizes at least 2,000 organizations throughout the world that are attacking the problem. And I've heard estimates that there are more than 10,000, like lots more than 10,000 organizations that are trying to do something about this. And my role in this is I don't have any expertise in rescuing a child or rehabilitating a child or changing laws or encouraging the police. I don't have any ability of any sort. But what I do have a background in, and I'm 79 years old, and for a good bit of my life, I've been involved in fundraising for charities. So this is an area of expertise that I could contribute to it. And so what I'm doing with my time is fundraising for any organization that wants to participate in my fundraising effort. And I'll describe the fundraising effort.
Please.
Okay. I think the average person rarely has large sums of money available to give to anti-trafficking. And even if you're among the uber wealthy, you probably are already supporting charities. And if you want to give a great big check to an anti-trafficking organization, that probably means cutting back on someplace else that you're already committed to. And on April 11th of last year, that was a situation I was in. I'm sitting in the audience, and it happens to be a business conference because I was the speaker there. I was speaking on how to make your family business last. But this speaker that I was sitting in the audience listening to I'm so moved by his stories and by the need that I'm sitting there thinking, I'd like to write a great big check to support him. But then I'm thinking, if I do that, that means cutting back on other organizations that I support and love, like, for example, the food bank or a homeless shelter or environmental things that I support. And if I were to cut back on any of those in a significant way, they'd feel it. I mean, it's possible it might mean, well, it would probably mean less services provided. It even might possibly mean an impact on staff. So I'm sitting in the audience thinking, who can I cut back? Who can I cut back? And it just was so clear to me that I didn't want to cut back on the food bank or any of the others that I care about. And so I'm thinking, what do I do? And then an idea came to me. I have inherited a desk that we believe dates back to the year 1600. So, good Lord, seriously old. And it belonged to a de Medici cardinal. And it occurred to me, as I'm sitting there in the audience, I bet if I put that up for sale, two good things would happen. I'd raise a lot of money for anti-trafficking, but I could also engineer a lot of attention around this. I mean, when a desk that's historically important, it would make the newspapers, and because my career has been in communications, I know a lot of people that I think I could get to publicize the sale of the thing. So I'm feeling all good. Great. I'll give up this desk. It's my most precious possession, but look at the good it could do. In fact, it just seemed to me that fundraising would be really important. And then the idea occurred to me, if I'm willing, if it's hard for me to write a great big check because the money I have available is already spoken for existing charities. But if I have an object that I would part with, might there not be other people who have things that they care about that they would put up for auction? And that's the beginning of Win This Fight.
So you're really asking people who, probably are extended out or, feel like their funds are allocated to certain areas that they, very much care about and don't want to limit or relinquish those contributions, to consider taking items that they might have or items that we might have that, might have emotional value, or might have nostalgic value, and probably have real value, and consider auctioning those off and using the funds that from that to contribute to the Win This Fight campaign.
Yeah, and let me tell you the kind of successes that have happened so far. COVID-19 has put a lot of what I'm about to describe on hold, but I'll tell you how far it's gotten so far. The biggest donation that has come in is from a man in Taiwan. His family was the hereditary curator of the most recent imperial dynasties of China. And he gave me, he put in my hand and said, it's yours, a 69 carat perfect ruby that has been in I forget which dynasty it is, possibly the Sung dynasty, but whichever dynasty it is, for 300 years. It should sell for $40 million. Other donations, one of the world's larger perfect emeralds that was salvaged from the lost treasure ship Atocha the Atocha sank in 1622, I think. Or there in the world, there are 14 imperial Russian dinner plates from the year they were made in 1825. Well, there was a Russian Tsar who, before he became Tsar, his father gave him this dinner set. And that we know of, there are 14 of these plates in the world, and 2 of them are in the Hermitage Museum, and 12 of them belong to a couple of brothers who hate trafficking. And they have pledged these 12 plates, and there's a Russian oligarch who already wants to buy them when the auction comes up. So So in theory, the major auction could raise $100 million. And,
right.
And I'm going to guess that everybody's going to wonder right off, well, where does the money go? And I don't want to be in the position of picking winners. So instead, the donor gets to say which anti-trafficking organization it goes to.
That's wonderful. And so how let's say we have a listener here, maybe they don't have products that were worth 7 or 8 or 7 or 8 figures. Maybe they just have something that's worth a few $1,000s or even a few $100s. How would a listener know which agency or which anti-trafficking, there must be charlatans out there, unfortunately. There must be some agencies that look like they're okay that maybe aren't so okay. Or I hate to have that skepticism, but that I know from other areas of life that they exist, those kind of agencies. Yes,
you're so right on that, because since this is organized crime is heavily involved in trafficking, and they've discovered that they can set up a charity and it sounds wonderful, and they can set up a website that's just utterly convincing. I have a way around that problem, which is the financial institution, UBS. It has as one of its biggest charitable activities, anti-trafficking. And they're in a position, if you're a financial institution, if you're a bank, you're probably pretty good at finding out who's for real and who's a fake. And so they're willing to certify I don't think they're going to certify 2,000, but they are going to, and anyone that we recommend, they will certify. So I think you can guarantee that if you go to one of the ones that we recommend, that it's for real.
Okay. And then you're agreeing that there are some that are probably backwards, that are when you donate just because it sounds good, you're not going to be entirely certain that it's all on the up and up.
Let me give you one example that I heard recently. Oh, I hope the criminal cartel doesn't come after me for saying this publicly, but here goes. Oh, Lord. Well, here goes. I have heard that there's a very, very well-funded charity, but it's a front organization, and it's encouraging legislators and voters to say sex between consenting adults should be legal. And they can make it sound really good, and they can talk about looking out for the health of sex workers. They just package it in a way that makes you think, oh, this could cut down on illegal sex if sex were legalized, if consenting paid for sex was legalized. I mean, that sounds kind of good.
Yeah.
But here's what's behind it. And what I'm about to describe, I heard from the head of the sex crimes unit of the NYPD. He says that the bad guys are funding this thing that makes you think that you're making trafficking stop existing, because if you could legalize it, you wouldn't have to have the pimps and the protection and everything. That's how they make it sound. But what it really is if sex between consenting adults is legalized, he estimates that might make it maybe even 100 times more difficult to prosecute the bad guys, because
right.
It's all legal. And so, according to what I've heard from multitudes of sources, they put a lot of effort into A, raising money for what sounds like something good, and B, exploiting it to making, to get their criminal tentacles ever more deeply into the sex trade. I mean, as it is, and again, this is from my NYPD source, he said, taken from a global level, if you are engaged if you're a pimp, and you have like 4 girls, and you're earning $1 million a year, which can happen in New York. But what I'm about to describe is global. Your chances of being prosecuted are like 1 in 100. Your time, or actually prosecuted is the wrong word. The odds of your doing jail time or paying a serious penalty are less than 1 in 100. And, part of that is huge efforts by the bad guys to make sure that this is invisible and that we don't talk about it, and and that we have laws that make it easier for them to ply their miserable, execrable trade.
Wow.
So I've got all the sympathy in the world for victims of human trafficking, but I'm actually glad I'm not in law enforcement, because if you tell me that there's a guy who's making $1 million a year tax-free off of the suffering of 12-year-old girls, I'm glad I'm not in law enforcement, because I wouldn't trust myself not to do something unthinkable to the monster who's responsible for this.
Right. There's a lot of compassion that you're showing here, Mitzi, for a lot of different spaces. And even if you don't mind showing some capacity for the, the vindictiveness that just naturally arises from these heinous crimes.
Oh, then may I jump in and make a comment?
Yes.
I want to tell you how I happened to get the 69-carat ruby.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, the effort that I've described, Win This Fight, is global, and I have contributions pretty much from all over the world. But the biggest one was from this wonderful Taiwanese guy, and I'm visiting with him in his home, and we're having tea, and I'm describing what I'm up to and one thing or another. And then suddenly, out of the blue, he asked me, "Aren't you afraid that the cartels will kill you?" And I answered without thinking. I just blurted out what I thought. And I said, "I'm 79 years old. I believe in this cause. I don't care." And it was at that point, we've been sitting on like chairs facing each other. He got up, he walked to a wall hanging, and he sort of pulled it aside, and behind it was a safe. And so he jiggles with the safe, opens it, and takes out the 69-carat ruby. And he said, "Thank you. I want you to have this because we have to do something about this." But I'm guessing that if I hadn't blurted out, "I don't care if I die," I'm not sure that he would have given a 69-carat ruby to the cause.
Right. Right. There is something about coming to grips with, sort of like what we talked about earlier in the call. So again, thank you for that story. Very vivid, really, really got that one. It's, I can just see him opening the wall and bringing you that. How big is a 69 carat? I've never seen.
Well, trust me, I've never seen one before. I had seen a 5-carat ruby. A 5-carat ruby is, it's the size of my little fingernail, which is probably a third smaller than your little fingernail. That's a 5-carat ruby.
All right. So this is 14 times bigger than that. Yeah.
Boy, you do math in your head brilliantly. My best description of it is, imagine something a little larger than a golf ball.
Right.
And that's pretty darn big for a stone. But its value is, just as a ruby, I've heard that $40 million. But when you take the history of the thing into account, I've heard people talk $60 million.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a pretty exciting day in my life.
Yeah, for sure. I got that. And so you're what does so you translate this ruby into some degree of rubles or shekels or dollars, and then it goes into the cause. And
well, actually, it doesn't just go into the cause, because I personally don't want to pick where it goes. So I invite. Well, actually, I'll help somebody if they're brand new and don't have any idea where to give. But in general, I would like the donor to pick where it goes. And UBS is going to make sure that that this doesn't become a money laundering organization. No money will get dispersed to anybody before UBS certifies that it's legit. And that was a huge concern of mine, because I was going to not proceed unless we could guarantee that we kept the bad guys out. I'm not in business to finance the bad guys.
Of course. So where does the good money get spent? In what different areas can you do something, or can they do something to actually take a bite out of this, this insanely ridiculous human practice?
I'm going to answer that in like 4 steps. There are 3 that you can find just people all over the world are engaged in trying to prevent trafficking. And that seems to have an awful lot to do with education and jobs. So it's highly tied to education and economics. That's one approach. That's prevention. There's rescue. And there are huge numbers of organizations that are vastly effective at this. Some of the best that I'm aware of use like Navy SEALs or special ops guys who are just really good at extractions. And that's just such an important thing. But then once you've rescued a girl and she's, equivalent of being raped thousands of times, how does she ever get her life back? And that's the third part. It's rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. And I'm just stunned that rehabilitation can even happen. I mean, somebody who's been through that much trauma, and the trauma isn't just the indignity and pain of being raped. It's also the perpetrator, the pimp, the slave owner is doing everything to tear the girl's view of herself down, making her think that she deserved this. So how you can bring a girl back from this, or a guy, because a certain number of these sex slaves are boys or men. But I know more about the girl part, so let's stick with women for the moment. How does she recover from that, and can she? And it turns out that, yes, she can. It may take years, but their programs are just genius at rebuilding lives. And I actually know this fairly well because I've made friends and spent time with a number of women who have turned their lives around with a lot of help. And one of them, my son was dating her, and I got to know her really quite well. Her time of being trafficked is probably 20 years in the past, but she simply determined that she wasn't going to let this ruin her life. And she went and got an education and a great job and became a fantastic person. And her life now is dedicated to helping other women or girls who've been through this.
Amazing.
So there's three main parts, and then I'll get to the fourth, which is the most exciting. So prevention, rescue, rehabilitation, and now the great big fourth. The great big fourth is there is an organization, and in a few months, I think I can talk about it in greater detail and name names and tell which countries we're talking about. But there is an organization, and as far as I can tell, there may be 100 different subgroups working together on this. And the great big goal is to pick one country. And I know that they have been considering Bangladesh. I don't know if that's going to be the country. It might be an African country. But hypothetically, let's suppose it's Bangladesh. This consortium of experts from all over the world, whether they're academic or organizations that have experience in rehabilitation or rescue or prevention, what if they all converged in one country and used every scrap of information that we've with such effort have learned, and you put it all together, and the goal is to eliminate trafficking entirely in one country. And it may be by increasing the police force so that there's a greater penalty for trafficking. Or maybe it's a huge effort for education for girls so that they have jobs and, aren't forced into it because they're desperate. Or maybe it's, once there is somebody who's trafficked, the good guys just converge on the trafficker and stop it that way, and then huge amounts of rehabilitation. So what if, using all the knowledge that we can, and some of the great universities of the world are going to be part of this. I believe Harvard's part of this. They have at the business school, and I think at the law school as well, they have a program on learning everything that we can about human trafficking and how to stop it. So again, what if every force that the world can muster focuses on one country, we actually do stop trafficking in one country, and then the academics study what worked and what didn't. Mm. And I've already heard people predict that we're going to learn that some things that sound good don't have much of an impact at all. And some things that seem like really way out, like fresh water, has a huge impact. And at the end of this program, they're going to know a huge amount about what works and what doesn't work. And then the goal is to use that knowledge in other countries and eventually replicate it. And, the final goal is to eliminate it from the world. And by the way, that's one of the United Nations goals for help, I'm not good at the name of it, but the United Nations has a goal of eliminating human trafficking. But it's
Beautiful.
exciting that it could happen. And from what I've heard from people who are participating in this, the one logjam is funding. They're going to do it and they are getting the money. But what if somebody has a private yacht or a jet that they no longer want and they put it up for auction at the auction that When This Fight is planning? And supposing, I don't know, a nice $40 million yacht, and it could go towards this project of learning how to eliminate trafficking worldwide. What a contribution that would be.
Yeah, beautiful. There's a couple things I want to point out here, Mitzi. I wonder if you've looked at this whole thing the way I'm about to, which is, first of all, when you speak to Mother Teresa's quote, which I adored, and I'm sure my listeners did as well, is just phenomenal. And, really just, I forgot what, give me the quote again.
I'd love to share it again.
Yeah, please.
In fact, do we have time for me to tell the background of it? It's like a 2-minute story.
Of course.
Okay. Mother Teresa, she was assigned at a fairly young age by her order to teach the children of the wealthy in India. And so she was in a convent, and being in a convent, she was barely allowed outside of the convent. And she taught young girls who came from very privileged families. But she wanted to do something outside of the convent. She felt that the need, her religion told her that you serve the humblest of men and you're serving me, or the men and women, I suppose that one should say, but you serve the humblest and you're serving me. And she felt she wasn't serving the humblest. And so she went to the person in the Catholic hierarchy that she reported to and said, I want to leave the convent. I want to stop teaching the children of the rich. And I want to help the lepers in, I'm not sure what city it is.
Wow.
Let's say it's New Delhi with the understanding that might not be the exact city.
That's fair.
But, New Delhi's a placeholder for whatever city it really was.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so she goes to the superior and he says, no, you can't do that. You can't make any difference. 1,000 people die of leprosy every single day here. There's no point. Don't do it. No. And she answered him back.
Yes.
It's immoral to be discouraged by the magnitude of a problem. The good that we can do, we must do. Well, she was released from her vow of staying in the convent, and she went out and she began serving lepers.
Wow.
And, the amount of good that she did was just incandescent because people began copying her, and untold numbers of people copied her example and began serving the poorest of the poor.
Right.
And something else that interests me absolutely no end is, how did she feel about all this? A dying leper is, I've never seen one, but it's pretty easy to guess that it's not a pretty sight. And she did for her entire life, she kept her vow of poverty. The possessions that she owned were 3 cotton saris and the sandals on her feet. She did not own anything else. She described her life in a biography of hers that I read. She said, my life has been a feast of unending joy.
Mm-hmm.
So serving others, it sure led to happiness in her case.
Sure. I love that. I didn't know those details, and I'm moved. I'm moved deeply by the story and who she was. And, Mitzi, this is where I wanted to point is like who you are, which was the original question after all. And what I'm noticing is, look, we haven't really talked about the couple, the two men in your life who these business titans. And you mentioned briefly that who your father was, and I don't think we've quite talked about Frank yet. But there's something about what you were born into, what you then grew up with, that what you then became, what you are now, and who you say you are for the future, that it just maps on so terrifically to the life that you've been given. And, when you speak to even who Mother Teresa was speaking to, and you humbly take on being a lot of levels that person, you indeed were the daughter of one of the, if not the greatest hotel magnate in the world. And you indeed were married to a man who made an industry from 0 to 60 or 0 to 6 million, a household name in our present societies, period. Like Sheraton and chicken are two things it's people get these things, and you've been with that and breathed in air from that from the very moment you arrived here on Earth. So it somehow maps perfectly that you are who you are today. And I really can see how you're growing win this fight from the ground up as well, that there is a huge problem here. And as Teresa says, it's not too huge to take a bite into, that's for sure. And it's immoral not to if you can. And you have the legacy to support that. That's what your whole purpose on Earth is about. So I would love to hear you comment on that, if you feel that that's accurate, or if you'd like to expound in any way.
Well, I'd love to. It brings me back to something that happened probably 30 years ago. I was invited to address a group of 8th graders at a local girls' school. And I thought I was going to talk about the environment, because I was an environmental writer, and, I'd been doing it for years, and I knew enough people, enough facts. I thought I could give a bang up good talk. So I accepted. But then after I'd accepted, they told me what they wanted me to talk about. And they wanted me to talk about success. And, they had already booked me. They had told people that I was coming. And so, it's kind of hard to back out. And I'm thinking, what do I know about success? So I went to the library, and I spent, at least a day. This being 30 years ago, I couldn't have gone to the internet. And I began studying what success meant. And, maybe this is what today would call confirmation bias, but it seemed to me as if a lot of the great thinkers had come up with the same answer. And Plato, for example, said that the only way to find true success in life is through service to the community. Martin Luther King said, we can all be great because we can all serve. Even my mother, not famous, but somebody I admired a whole lot, she said that the givers of the world are happy, the takers of the world are miserable. So better to be a giver. And then there's Mother Teresa, who her entire success in life was built on service. And so I came up with, trying to put all of this together. And, I had notebooks full of quotes from different people. And I put it together into what is my own motto. And that is, success is measured not by what you can get, but by what you can give. And so I would love to polish every skill I have and increase my talent stack and be able to give more and more. So I want success because then I can give away more.
Exactly. And that's what your dad said a little bit too, right? When he was talking about his life.
The greatest joy, the greatest pleasure his money ever gave him was in giving it away.
Right. Yeah, there is a pattern to this theme, isn't there? And it really comes from all sources. Like when it all boils down, like when you really, really get all the flaws and all the dust out, when you really, really are done trying to serve your selfish purposes or, what you think are your own personal wants and needs, when you get that that's not being done and it's not a satisfactory life, it seems like what you're saying here is a universal truth of what brings happiness or what brings joy, what brings satisfaction to one's life is in the world of serving.
Actually, can I share my other moment of runner's high?
Please.
And I'm a little worried and concerned talking to somebody with a background in psychiatry about hearing voices.
There's nothing to worry about. I hear voices all day, every day. There's nothing to worry about. I promise you.
Phew. Okay. So another time I'm running and going farther and faster than normal. And all of a sudden it stops being an effort and everything begins to glow and be beautiful. And a voice asks me, would you like to know the nature of good and evil?
Wow.
And yeah, sure. Bring it on.
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, why not? And so the voice told me, good is that which is strengthened by beauty and peace and healing and growth. Evil is that which is strengthened by pain and suffering and stunting of growth. So I want to be in the side of good. I want to be energized by beauty and peace and healing and growth.
Mm-hmm.
And
Amen.
I'd like to combat evil because evil is fed by pain and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that the greatest evil that I'm aware of is human trafficking. And again, I go back to that 12-year-old girl of which there are millions
yes,
who are suffering right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think even 5 seconds of silence is a good idea right here.
Yeah, my mind was going to the kind of suffering that, I can't know what a 12-year-old girl is feeling who's being violated each night. But right. I do have a close friend, former chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at New York University Medical Center. His name's Dr. Robert Kenkro. He's retired now. But he's treated, to my amazement, he's treated victims of trafficking, and he's also treated the people who, the pervert monsters who do it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm asking him, what is a girl who's trapped in this feeling? And he said, imagine the worst depression that you've ever had. Maybe a loved one died. Maybe your mother died, maybe a child died, and you're feeling just incredible pain. But he said, when a typical person comes into my office with depression, there's a beginning to it, a middle, and an end. He said with the girl who's being trafficked, it's that kind of depression, the loss of absolutely everything that gives life any kind of pleasure. All that's gone. It's just unending, without relief and without end depression. Mm-hmm. And, this is as dark a subject as you can get into. But the other side of that is think of the release from pain that you can be part of if you either prevent or rescue or rehabilitate.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's dark, and it's there's something beautiful for me. I'm one who is very uncomfortable in the all light. I'm very uncomfortable. I'm just as uncomfortable in the all light as I am in the all dark. And I really, to me, to live a beautiful life, one has to be really aware of what the darkness is and, be willing to take a look at this, be willing to actually immerse oneself, be willing to get it where, I'm not healthy till we're all healthy or really take on what matters, not just to this bag of bones I call myself, but to the world at large, all of the human race in the same breath. And That's what I feel like you're bringing forth is an opportunity for us as listeners, and not just listeners. Like if the listeners might have someone else in their life that they're really thinking about right here, and those people can be affected by this conversation as well.
Well, if they want to write me, I'd love to hear their stories and what they'd like to do. And of course, I'll be trying to recruit them as hard as I can. Well,
that's great. Well, how, if someone wants to follow you or wants to write you or wants to become part of, what you're dedicating your life to, or wants to just touch base or question or just learn, or who knows, so get in touch with you in any way, how might they do that, Mitzi?
Okay, I'd love to be followed on LinkedIn, and that's Mitzi Perdue. And Perdue is spelled Perdue. But for this one time, I'm going to give out my personal email, and I'm doing it for a reason. It's not just because I'm a nice guy, but my website is being rejiggered. And the contact form there, I can't be positive that it's going to be functional at the time they read this. So normally, I direct people to the contact form at auntmitzi.com or mitziperdue.com. But instead, if they would like my direct email, and I make a commitment to answer the emails that come my way, if they write to Mitzi, and that's Mitzi, Mitzi, at auntmitzi.com. And Aunt is like, it's not Uncle Mitzi, it's Aunt Mitzi. So Mitzi at auntmitzi.com. If you write to me, I'll answer you.
Beautiful.
And I'll answer you with great enthusiasm if you want to volunteer.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great? It would be super cool. Mitzi, if anyone joins in any rank as a result of this call, I'm going to feel like I got an assist just by meeting you and speaking with you. And I think there's an opportunity that I'd like to explore with you as well.
Perfect. Hey, everybody, think good thoughts towards getting Dr. Fred to join.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you. And it's true. Once you say something, and then you get a bunch of people who's like, oh yeah, that's what you said. Then things happen. And maybe that's how this will go as well. All right, Mitzi. Well, let's take this. We're going to start easing out here. It's hard. It's hard to stop talking to somebody when you have such a fascinating conversation. But I'm gonna try to taper us off here. And the way I'm going to do that. Well, first, let's make sure that you feel like you're complete and you've exhausted at least the parts of the topics we've talked about enough so that you feel complete to proceed.
Well, I will confess I feel I gave it everything I have.
All right, beautiful. Left it all on the court. That is beautiful. So, Mitzi, what about life today? Sometimes I don't even say the day, but today's date is July 21st, 2020. And what is it about today that is just remarkable and beautiful, exciting, ecstatic, brings you total joy to be alive?
Communication. And
say more.
Okay. This is a question that I sometimes ask people if it's maybe we're at a convention or people that I don't know well, and maybe it's in the evening, 10, 11 at night, and we're drinking adult beverages, and we're just sort of, defenses down. And I ask people, for you, what's the greatest pleasure in life? And people have all sorts of answers. I mean, for some, It's their grandchildren. For some, it's listening to Beethoven's Fifth. For some, it's creating a painting or getting better at music or whatever. For me, the greatest pleasure in life is communication. Feeling that I'm either touching or being touched by people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love it. Thank you. Well, communication and connection is what I would say we gave a good shot at creating that in this last hour. So thank you so much for joining us and joining me and having really such a rich conversation that went into the depths of, this took a fair amount of communication to go where we went, and then to ease ourselves out to the point that we can be left whole and complete after exploring that is also the magic of communication. So we can go into it, we can feel it as best we can emote, we can look at what's working and what's not. We can explore what can be done and what can't be done. We can even explore the history of what created it and the kind of people that are either, good guys or bad guys, like you say, or we really can place ourselves in a position to make a difference. And all of that takes place in communication. And all of that communication took place in less than an hour in this conversation. So with deep gratitude, I thank you, Mitzi Perdue, for being on the show.
It was sheer joy from beginning to end.
Awesome. All right, listeners. Well, there you have it. Another unbelievable episode. And see what I'm saying? I get to meet beautiful people. So stay tuned for more from Mitzi Perdue. All you have to do is write her. All you have to do is Mitzi's willing to give you her email. And I strongly suggest that if you have somebody, if you or if someone wants to write her or to call Mitzi, this is a good time right now to do so. So Mitzi, again, thank you so much. It's been a deep pleasure. I don't know if it's too early to tell you I love you, but I'm going to do it anyways. I love you. Thanks for being exactly.
I love you too.
All right. Well, you have a beautiful rest of the day and a beautiful rest of, rest of your life until the next time we speak, which hopefully will be very soon. Take care, Mitzi.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Okay. So thanks so much for tuning in today. I had a great time today with Mitzi. And there's so many things I loved about this interview. For instance, I had no idea how broad-based, how deep this notion of human trafficking is going on in the world. And Mitzi was just so clean about it and so clear and just brought such passion and really has made it her life's work. It's just inspiring. And then you look at Mitzi and, she's the daughter of the Sheraton hotel chain creator, founder. And she's the husband of Frank Perdue, an entrepreneur in her own right. And she's been really successful, in the way that most people measure success. And when I asked her what gives her the most pleasure in life, instantaneously, she gave the response, communication. I just love that. It's just the essence of humanity. And really, the thing that was so sweet and so important and so moving about who she was her motto. The purpose and meaning of life is to serve one another. What a terrific person. What a terrific interview. So maybe as you were listening, you thought, I'd really have a friend who would love to hear this, or a family member or a colleague. Go ahead and reach out to them right now and invite them to listen. And invite them to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. While you're at it, why don't you take a moment and subscribe to the same podcast on your podcast player? That way I can assure you that you will get the latest episodes. And secondly, if you appreciate what we do here, just take a few minutes and review us on Apple Podcasts, because reviews and subscriptions are the way that we can get more listeners to listen to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. And if these conversations that we have had here contribute to your life, go ahead and pay it forward by subscribing and leaving a review. So to catch up with past episodes, head on over to welcometohumanity.net/podcast. And until then, this is Dr. Fred, and this has been another unbelievable episode of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. Thanks for listening. Have a beautiful day.